Religious evidence. Religious evidence is of two types, naql and aql. Documentary or textual, that's naql, and intellectual, that's aql. Whatever is acquired through hearing is called naql. Log, or conveyance or transmission, or sama' or sam'i or sama', what is heard. It cannot be mixed with what applies to the intellect, the aql. Like, for example, the angels. The proof for that is naql, or sama', and paradise and hell. Whereas the attributes of Allah, it has proof from the aql, the intellect, and it has proof from the naql. All the religious issues, they have proof from the naql, and some of them have proof from the aql. It cannot be mixed with what applies to the intellect. What is heard can't be mixed with what applies to the intellect. Like talking about the angels and the enjoyment of the grave and the torture of the grave. Sheikh Abdul Razak read to us that the Sheikh said, السمع ما يبلغه الأنبياء والعقل إدراك النفس بواسطة العقل. The sama', the transmitted evidence, refers to what is conveyed by the prophets. The aql, mental evidence, is what the self realizes by way of the intellect. Allah said, وَقَالُوا لَوْ كُنَّا نَسْمَعُ أَوْ نَعْقِلُ مَا كُنَّا فِي أَصْحَابِ السَّعِيرِ. The blasphemers will say, after being put in hellfire, had we listened to the warning of the messengers as seekers of the truth, and had we used our minds by contemplation and reflection, we would not have been among the inmates of the inferno. Mufassir al-Nasafi said, وفيه دليل على أن مدار التكليف على أدلة السمع والعقل وأنهما حجتان ملزمتان. He said, therein, in this ayah, is corroboration, yani evidence, that accountability is centered around the transmitted and intellectual proof, and that each of those types is imposing evidence. The documentary sources are four: Quran, Hadith, consensus, all of which will come with details later if Allah willed, and the legal comparison, Qiyas. It is the people of the Sunnah in particular who merge and utilize all four of these types of religious evidence in the branches of the religious fields. And there is no deviant group but that they reject at least one of these types of evidence. It is clear that Ahlus Sunnah is the successful group because they use all the religious bases without rejection of any. At-Tahawi did not mention Qiyas in his text as a source of religious evidence because he saw that mentioning the consensus was sufficient. For Ahlus Sunnah has agreed that Qiyas is indeed religious evidence, just not in the creed. He said, وَلَا نُصَدِّقُ كَاهِنًا وَلَا عَرَّافًا ولا من يدعي شيئا يخالف الكتاب والسنة وإجماع الأمة. We do not believe a fortune teller, diviner, or anyone who claims something that opposes the book, the sunnah, or the consensus. So he only mentioned three, he didn't mention four. What we're saying here is his mentioning the consensus is enough to confirm the Qiyas, according to Tahawi. There is a rule that is appropriate for this subject. Hafiz al-Khatib Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi narrates with his chain of narration back to Muhammad ibn Isa al-Tabba' that he said, every hadith that came to you from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but it did not reach you that the companions practiced it, then leave it. There are several reasons why the narration with a continuous chain would be rejected from a trustworthy person from whom there is no fear of fabrication, meaning someone who's reliable. There are still reasons why the narration of a reliable narrator, and even if the narration has a continuous chain, to be rejected. The first of them is that it would conflict with what is dictated by the intellects. By that, its invalidity would be known because the sacred law only comes with what is approved by the intellects. The sacred law only comes with what is approved by the intellects. That means whatever came in this religion, its mental judgment is either that it's mentally necessary or it's mentally possible. And nothing in the religion, we are not obligated to believe in anything that's mentally impossible. The sacred law only comes with what is approved by the intellects, and it does not come with what opposes the intellects. The second is that it would oppose what is explicit from the book or the mutawatir sunnah, because both the book and the mutawatir sunnah are mutawatir. Whenever a report is by tawatur, which is a successive mass narration, it has its details. Anything that's reported like that is impeccably true. Impeccably true. The Quran is reported like that. Yani, when I say impeccably true, that means an accurate report. An accurate report. The information that's being reported is true. I'm not talking about how to interpret something. So the book is narrated by tawatur. It's very letters. And some of the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is narrated by tawatur, this successive mass narration. And this is two types. One that is said verbatim the same way by tawatur, and one that is not said the same way, but it's still tawatur in meaning. Like the torture of the grave, it is confirmed by tawatur. Even if an individual hadith about the torture of the grave was less than tawatur in itself. But the reports about that from the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam in meaning are of the level of tawatur, so it's definitively confirmed. That's why if someone denies the torture of the grave, he commits blasphemy, because it's known in the religion by necessity and its evidence is tawatur in meaning. Unless he never heard about that. If he was a new Muslim or like a new Muslim, then we teach him. So whatever is of the level of tawatur is authentically reported. Whatever is less than tawatur could be also authentically reported, or it might not be. And there's a range or a spectrum, a scale of grading the hadiths. When we say weak and hasan, fair, and sahih, sound, authentic, when we say that, we're not talking about mutawatir. When we say weak, da'if yani, or hasan, or sahih, like that, usually, we're not talking about what's mutawatir, because mutawatir is always sahih. It's the highest level of sahih report. But what's less than mutawatir, it might be sahih or might not be sahih. So when it's sahih, authentic, we say sahih. This one is sahih. If it's not, we say it is da'if. So the second is that it would oppose what is explicit from the book or the mutawatir sunnah. Now also, why explicit? Explicit and mutawatir, the combination of those two give you definitive evidence. Explicit and mutawatir. Because explicit means it cannot have another meaning. And mutawatir means that the report is authentic for sure. So that's definitive evidence. So an explicit ayah from the Quran is definitive evidence, definitive. Or from an explicit mutawatir hadith, that's definitive evidence, definitive. Qat'i, dalilun qat'i. Another type of evidence is called dalilun dhanni. Evidence, a speculated evidence. Like when a Shafi'i makes ijtihad and Malik disagrees with him, it's not definitive evidence, or else they would not have disagreed. So it could be this or it could be that, and each one has his proof to take him one way or the other, and he's qualified. Then that's called dalilun dhanni, speculated or a supposed evidence. So the second reason why such a narration from a reliable narrator with a continuous chain of narration would still be rejected is because it would oppose what is explicit from the book or the mutawatir sunnah. It would then be known that it has no basis, that such a report has no basis, or that it is abrogated. If it does have a basis and it's contradicting one of these, an explicit ayah from the Quran or an explicit mutawatir hadith, and it's authentic, then it would be abrogated. The third is that it would oppose the consensus. All the mujtahids agreed to something. A hadith from a reliable narrator with a continuous chain of narration was found that has in it what's against the consensus. It would then be concluded, how do we judge this hadith, or what do we say about that? That either it has no basis, that means it's fabricated, or that it is abrogated, meaning it was in effect, but it's no longer in effect. If this is an authentic hadith against the consensus, then it would have to be abrogated. Why? For it is inconceivable that it would be sahih, authentic, not abrogated, still in effect, an authentic hadith that should be applied, and the entire nation unanimously agrees to oppose it. It's impossible. Why is it impossible? It's impossible because the religious evidence has shown that the entire nation will not agree on a mistake. If the mujtahids came to an ijma', then their answer is definitively correct. Ijma' of the mujtahids of the nation of Muhammad is definitive evidence. Here, the scholars of Ahlus Sunnah did not put their consensus to the side for a hadith that they found. So, an explicit ayah from the Quran, that's definitive evidence. An ayah that's not explicit from the Quran might be a speculated evidence for the one who's qualified. An explicit mutawatir hadith is definitive evidence. What's less than that for a hadith, yes, what's not mutawatir is not definitive evidence, except with the detail about the mashhur hadith for the expert. There's a level of hadith. It's not mutawatir, but the scholars said that it's possible to get definitive knowledge from it. Which is a hadith that's famous, according to the technical meaning of famous. A famous hadith has at least 3 narrators, is what famous means. Has at least 3 narrators, comes through the route of at least 3. Or comes through at least 3 routes. A famous hadith, not any famous hadith, but sometimes a famous hadith for an expert hafiz of hadith. The expert hafiz is the one who can get definitive knowledge from it. Not less than him. When it comes to mutawatir, what's the difference? When it comes to mutawatir, you don't have to be an expert to get knowledge from tawatur. What's the proof for that? The proof for that is that people who are not experts certainly achieve knowledge through reports that are tawatur. Like whom? Like the children and like the inexperienced ones who do not know how to research. They still gain knowledge from some reports. So that's why the children know that Muhammad existed and the Kaaba exists, even if they never saw that. And the people know that China exists, even if they never saw that with their own eyes. If they went there, they won't be more sure that China exists. You'd just be happy that you get to see it with your own eyes. So that's tawatur. You get knowledge from it, real knowledge. In fact, the scholars said tawatur report replaces the senses. Tawatur report replaces the senses. So what's less than tawatur does not give definitive knowledge, except the scholars talked about a type of, or instances when the famous hadith, mashhur, can be a reason for the expert to have knowledge. Is that clear? Then Al-Khatib said, the fourth is for an individual to narrate what would be necessary for everyone to know. This proves that it has no basis, because it is not possible that it would have a basis and he would be the sole one who knows about it among the great numbers of people. So there are some reports that what is expected of them is that everyone would know about such information. Some things, if you heard them, you would say, how is it that not everyone knows about that? How is it that only you know about that? So basically, when a report is like that, it makes it suspect. Now, I don't have a very sharp example that I can present to you confidently. I have something, mashallah, but I need to review it first. But this is the gist of it, or the rule here. The fifth is to be the only one to narrate what would normally be narrated by tawatur. It would not be accepted because it is not valid that he would be unique in the likes of such a narration. Okay. So I don't have an explanation that distinguishes those two paragraphs, or those two 4 and 5. It would not be accepted because it is not valid that he would be unique in the likes of such a narration. وَسُبْحَانَ اللَّهِ وَبِحَمْدِهِ